don't know if you can hear that, but okay. And then I will start the webinar right at 1 and then connect the live stream and then kind of give it like maybe 45 seconds. Then I'm just going to go ahead and start it. And then I'm kind of hoping people then will sort of trickle in. Let's see.
Julia, I'm staring in your eyes right now.
Oh, hi.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start the webinar, clicking start for that. So that has started. And now I'm going to connect the live stream. Okay. I think we are about to go live. Second. Cool. All right. Hello, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Grant Amon. I'm the director of Goethe Pop-Up Houston, a branch of the Goethe Institute, the Cultural Institute for the Federal Republic of Germany. I'm very excited to be joined today by three great individuals to talk about Hannah Arendt on friendship and our current open call for artists for our upcoming project titled Friendship and the Correspondence of Hannah Arendt, Forgiveness, Loyalty, and Authenticity. Feel free to send us your comments and questions throughout the talk, and we'll get to as many as we can towards the end of our hour. I'd like to now introduce the creative director and co-curator for this project, Julia Claire Wallace, who will moderate today's discussion. Julia is a Houston-based artist, curator, community facilitator, and director of experimental action, Houston's Performance Art Biennial. So without any further delay, I'll hand it over to you, Julia. Thank you.
Hello, and thank you, Grant, for that. I am, as Grant said, a creative director of this project. And this project started when my dear friend and collaborator, Joy Harris, approached me and started telling me all of this amazing information. She has a degree in government, a degree in, she's getting her doctorate in art and philosophy. She has a whole nother degree I can't even think of. She's super, super smart. And I am an artist who've done a lot of producing of projects. And so it made sense for us to come together as friends to do this project that is centered around friendship. It is full of, I mean, there's just endless information about the concept this is based around. And so for me as an artist, it was important to create some way to make this information a little more accessible. I have gained a lot in just talks with my friend Joy, who's explained these things to me. And the project that we've created has been using these ideas of friendship as part of the structure. This whole project is a social sculpture, and we're looking for 4 artists to do immersive work, and they are going to be workshopping these ideas with us, attending discussions about Hannah Arendt and her work in order to create these art pieces together. So we thought it would be wonderful to have a discussion between friends to make this information more accessible and understandable, and create a way for artists or anyone to ask questions about the information or about how to be a part of this actual project. So all of that being said, I'm going to pass it along to Joy, who will tell you more about her relationship with Hannah Arendt and the concept that she has put together and is exploring through this big, exciting project that we're doing.
Thank you, friend. I'm very glad to have Julia as my co-collaborator because she brings a lot of energy and creativity and flexibility and ingenuity to all the projects she works on. And definitely when we're talking about creating a project that is rooted in text and philosophical ideas, it's important to get people who are not all philosophers involved in the project. That's why Julia being part of this is so central to make this an exploration that really does talk about the world and not about the philosophical world. So Hannah Arendt, who is the focus of the project, was a 20th century political theorist. She was German and Jewish, and she was interested in politics, not philosophy. And by politics, I mean that she was interested in what the Greeks would call the polis, but basically in the world that we share with other people. So she wasn't necessarily completely interested in Republicans or Democrats or libertarians, though she did write about some of those things. She was interested in politics in a broader sense, and what she often termed, or has been termed, a more Monday, and that her work was really concerned about love of the world. How do we nurture, protect, and sustain a world that's full of a variety of people? And that's why I really love her. She started out as a philosopher, but she realized that philosophy didn't always do a great job of caring for the world. And so she turned to politics. She's most famous for two things. First, she wrote a book right after World War II called The Origins of Totalitarianism. And this was her making sense of the rise of totalitarianism in 20th century politics, because totalitarianism was a completely new form of politics. And she spent, I mean, the book is very large, but she spent quite a bit of time doing research on the history of anti-Semitism, et cetera, to kind of talk about how the ground was laid for totalitarianism. So she's famous for that. She's also famous for the term, the banality of evil. And this came about in a text that she wrote about the trial of Nazi war criminal Adolf Eichmann. Many of journalists and public thinkers wanted to claim that Adolf Eichmann was this evil human being, and instead she said Adolf Eichmann wasn't evil at all. He just didn't think, and that the root of true evil comes from our inability to think. So that was a very controversial thing to say, which caused a lot of ruptures in her friendships. And that's one of the things that we're thinking about in this project. So when I was talking to Grant about this project and we decided to do something on friendship, I was really excited about that, because a lot of times when people talk about Arendt, they do want to talk about fascism and dictatorship and totalitarianism and all this stuff. And it's all really important and, really timely, I suppose. But we could also talk about Arendt and her concept of amor mundi. So how do we love the world? And so with all of the commotion and everything that's happening and activist politics, and there are lots of things to be concerned about, there's lots of things to protest, there are lots of things to be concerned and upset about, but there are also lots of things, lots of resources to draw on that come from the world making that occurs when we talk with friends. And that's what I wanted to focus on for this project, because that I feel very lucky to be surrounded by brilliant people who are also my friends, like Maggie and like Julia, who make my world better and question my thinking. And so I thought, why not do something different? And why not, let's focus on Arendt, and particularly her friendships seen through the lens of the vast number of published letters that she has.
Yes, she talked about, and I love that you two philosophers can add information to this if I describe any of this incorrectly, but she talked a lot she learned through her discussions and through her friendships, and all of that was through letters. So looking at all these letters with all these really intelligent and interesting and varied people, we're able to see her in a more vulnerable place, changing the way she thinks based on her interaction with her friends, which I'm really excited to learn more about this. And with that, I will move us towards a conversation between two friends about this information, one of which is the wonderful Maggie Brown. And I'm going to ask Joy to introduce your friend and tell us all about Maggie.
Well, is it okay if before that I give like brief stats on what the project is, where people can find it, in the deadline?
That is a smart idea. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, friend.
So our project application can be found on Submittable, and I believe you can find that in the chat. Yes, because Grant's so great. If you follow that link, you'll see many people have used Submittable, but there are a series of questions and upload some of your previous projects. Like Julia mentioned before, we're looking for 4 people who are involved in participatory, engaged work, whether that's performance art, social practice, dance, music, architecture, anything that engages with the public. We're looking for 4 people to come together over the course of 6 months to study some selected correspondence of Hannah Arendt and her friends, because there's a lot of it. So selected correspondence. And then this project supports the Goethe Institute's larger Hannah Arendt project that's happening in 2022. So participants for this project will also be involved and be attending the salons that the podcast will be addressing. Excuse me. So we'll be reading letters, we'll be attending salons, we will have a workshop where as a group, as a cohort, we'll be talking about correspondence and coming up with sort of what we want to do for our final project, which will happen in the beginning of November, and immersive social sculpture. So the application for that is due on February the 28th. Let's see, I think if you don't see the link, I see that someone did not see the link. We'll try to post that again. From a sort of practical point of view, the applications are due on the 28th, and then they will be reviewed by a jury, and then we hope to get things started off in April. And the artists who will be selected will be given a stipend for their participation. So with that being said, can I introduce Maggie? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, so Maggie has been my friend for over 20 years. 20 years?
Oh, at least 25 almost.
25 years?
Almost 25, yeah.
Yes. And my family actually loved Maggie. Maggie came to my undergraduate graduation, and I had a great aunt who was probably 85 at the time, who was a hairdresser. This is when Maggie had dreadlocks, and said, "Oh, I love his hair. It's fantastic." My little bitty 4'11" great aunt. So anyway, I love that. Sorry, that has nothing to do with Hannah Arendt, but it does show that Maggie and I are quite longtime friends. And so I'm going to be formal, however, and read some of this bio so that I get everything correct. Maggie is a Den-based poet, philosopher, spiritual counselor, and mind walker. Besides their academic co-publications and intermittent podcasting, Maggie creates aphorisms to encourage their friends on a way to self-actualization, and that is certainly the case. Maggie has directed a few conferences at the University of North Texas in Denton since 1998, the North Texas Heidegger Symposium, Process Studies in Pedagogy, and the UNT Comics Graphic Novel and Serial Arts Studies Workshop. Besides being a lifetime member of the Carl Jaspers Society of North America, they're also a member in good standing, that's a curious term, in good standing with other philosophical
You'd be
groups.
surprised.
like the Society for Phenomenology and Existential Philosophy, as well as the Society for Phenomenology and the Human Sciences. Along with mentoring youth who want to practice philosophizing as a way of life, Maggie's works to make ancient texts more, they work for to make ancient texts more accessible to 21st century readers. After completing an MA in philosophy, Maggie is now close to completing that dissertation for philosophy at UNT. Untying the knots that bind existential elucidation and transgressive life is the dissertation. Maggie's work focuses on queering academic research and weirding professional philosophy, and he is very near and dear to me. I love him very much. So yay.
Wow.
So there we go. There we go. We're going to talk about friendship now, and Julia is going to try to wrangle us. So I told Julia and everyone else on this call, and I'll tell everyone who's out there in the world, that Maggie and I are both philosophers. And so if we start going off into philosophical la la land, Julia will draw us back in to the world with others. So if you have any questions while we're talking or need to help Julia veer us back in, it would, I'm sure, be very appreciated.
Yes. So let's start with a question for Maggie. Please tell me some of the tell me some of the things you've been inspired to think about in regards to friendship, inspired by looking at the way Arendt engaged with people in her letters.
That's a great question, actually. So I'm a Jasper. I'm a scholar, obviously, as you pointed out there, because I'm a member of the Carl Jaspers Society of North America. My scholarship's primarily about Carl Jaspers. Carl Jaspers was Hannah Arendt's dissertation director at Heidelberg, where she transferred to from Freiburg. And she did her dissertation with him under him on St. Augustine's notion of love. Mm-hmm. My mentor was a man named Richard Owsley that your name just went right out of my head, Joy. What's that all about? That Joy knew very well. And he was the first person who actually turned me on to the fact that Jaspers and Arendt had a, thick amount of correspondence that had been published. He obviously knew Arendt and Jaspers since he studied with Jaspers. And he thought that I would get a lot out of just kind of looking at how two thinkers mm-hmm. interacted with each other through letters. And of course, that was still when they were writing their letters. Jaspers died in 1969 and she died in 1974, right? Is that right? 72?
75. I think 75.
And so, they were still during the period of time where if you were at a distance from each other, you had to write letters. And so the letters are a lot more detailed at times than what you would normally expect. And when I started reading the letters, I realized that the thing that really made them cohesive wasn't the fact that they shared philosophy, but that they shared friendship. For Jaspers, what was actually important about being a philosopher was having profound, open, free exchange with friends. That's really what a philosopher is really doing. I think that even in some of the letters in the correspondence, he refers to writing things as that pretty little occupation or that pretty little thing we do. But what really matters is this exchange between people, you know, who know each other really well and want to know more, right? So I think that's really kind of where it all started. And then, of course, I was literally Dr. Owsley's best friend by the time he died, and he and I had been, you know, worked together for like almost a decade. So by the time he passed away, and I was, you know, looking at all of these different correspondences that Arendt had done with different people and that Jaspers had done with different people, I realized that, you know, philosophizing really only works in this personal modality. It only really goes, I mean, you can professionalize it, right? God knows we have. But what it really does is that when you philosophize, you literally are opening yourself up to the need for a friend. In other words, this is the last thing I'll say, and I'll throw it over to Joy, unless she had another question more specific for her. He literally says in his 1933 book, Philosophy, that philosophy until the 1920s and 30s, so the age of fascism, philosophy had been wrought by lonely, distant individuals who showed us what's possible, but didn't tell us to follow them because it's so hard. But he says, but now we're at a place, 1934, 35, we're at a place where we have to philosophize in communication. We can't philosophize in isolation. So I really see that everything that Arendt did in her career was taken off from that, to never philosophize in isolation, which is why she didn't go into philosophy. She went into political theory. Anyway, okay, so that's all I wanted to say.
Well, what I would like to say is that, well, a few things, but, you know, there is this idea that, and we talk about this a lot, Maggie, the difference between being a philosopher and philosophizing. And I think that what this project is about is really bringing about people to philosophize together. And by that, I mean, we're not looking for people who can write a paper on Hannah Arendt or about Heidegger or whatever. We're looking for people who have this same amor mundi, care for the world, who want to come together and create a world, like use friend making as a way to create a world. I mean, call it a cohort, but we'll call this like a circle of friends, where there's this openness and vulnerability in reading these papers and learning about each other's work, so that we can become friends and speak frankly and honestly with one another and try to develop something that's more than we could develop on our own. So I know that there was a question from Erica about if we're looking to have 4 artists come from different practices, or will there be some overlap? The question is, I don't know the answer to that. What we're really looking for are for 4 people who are interested in thinking and talking and creating with other people. So whether those are visual artists or some dancers or all singers or what have you, we're really looking for people who want to be part of this community for 6 months. So there are no limitations on how many disciplines are included or who can be involved. We're really looking for people who are going to philosophize. So philosophy in the deeper sense of the word, which is people who love wisdom and who want to go on a journey with other people. And I think that was very much what Arendt was doing. And Arendt was inspired by Jaspers in that way. And she did a turn. She turned away from the isolated world of thinking to the political world of acting and speaking with others.
Yeah.
I'll chime in here. One of the things that I've found interesting in learning more about her and her life was the period where she wrote about the Eichmann trial and received a lot of criticism in response, which was understandable criticism, but it is a good picture for me to see the difference between she's writing this thing for the public And
Mhm.
then she's writing about her feelings of the way it's been received and wrestling with the points that people have used in their criticisms of her, and sorting out her reaction and her feelings about it, and finding her own like finding groundedness in her ideas through these conversations with friends. And that is a dynamic that I see a lot today, of people seeing these controversies, having a kind of fear of
Mm.
public criticism, um,
Mm.
and then having all these private conversations like, was that messed up that I did that thing? He's like, am I being crazy or whatever? But I love that we get to see both of those
Yeah.
conversations from her.
So to give some background on what Julia's talking about, when Arendt wrote Eichmann in Jerusalem, where she came up with the subtitle of it is The Banality of Evil, when she wrote this, it was very much in contrast to what other people thought she would write about. There was an expectation that she would have a particular view of the Eichmann trial. That's the New Yorker, who she wrote the original articles for. The New Yorker thought she was going to go in a particular direction, and much to their surprise and to the surprise of her colleagues, she went in a completely different way, this banality of evil, which caused her to lose friendships, even caused her to get death threats, like letters. But when she after the publication of the letters in the New York, or of the articles in the New Yorker, she got volumes and volumes of hate mail, basically, but a lot of letters from the public questioning her stance. And in her biography, it says that she answered all of those letters because she thought it was important to do that. But when you brought up before this idea of Hannah Arendt and cancel culture, I hadn't really put that together, because she was blacklisted from many of her, or she was excommunicated from many of her long-term friends.
And I saw that one of her friends actually published all of their private letters, their correspondence, which I thought that was interesting. In that sometimes, people sharing screen caps of personal information, that seems to happen a lot these days, and it's strangely familiar to see that.
Well, if you've got the receipts, you have to let people see them so that they know what you're arguing about. But she lost some really old close friends, like people she'd known since Germany. Since she was a young person in Germany studying, like Hans Jonas and
Gershom Scholem. Did I get that name right? And they were working together to get, I'm going to just do a philosophy thing right here. They were working very closely together to get Walter Benjamin's works published in England, get published at all. And that it was very difficult for Arendt, because with that break, she felt like some of that work was lost. I mean, not that he wasn't eventually published, but some of the momentum that they had built together was kind of lost for that reason.
Right. I just, this is one of those areas where I feel like, what does Eichmann in Jerusalem have to do with friendship? Because I do think that it has to do something with that. It has actually probably a great deal to do with that. But, in terms of not just the fact that her going there and writing what she wrote lost her some interactivity with certain people, or got her on the wrong side of, a group of people who felt the need to attack her. It's the very idea of how do you present your inner thoughts publicly? And is there, in such a way that your friends won't be shocked by it? So that, right, and in one sense, so I kind of really feel like it's
Well, so there's, when you're talking about Eichmann and friendship, there's and I could pull, I have the, I think I have the quote from the letter right here. And it's not from the letters, from the Jewish writings. She says, the only kind of love that I know and believe is in the love of person. So she was very clear when she was like, her thought was about the plurality of individual people. So she was never interested in or felt like she could love a whole group of people, right? So she could only look at individual people. And I think that
Yeah.
that sort of ground, or it was like kind of underneath the writing of Eichmann, because she wasn't writing something on behalf of Zionists or on behalf of other Jews or what have you. She was writing something on behalf of her, about Eichmann as a person, not about who Eichmann represented or what group he came from. So in terms of friendship, we're talking about candidly speaking, and talking about individual people and not groups of people, right?
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think that it's important to really kind of point that out, that one of the reasons that this text gets the reception it does is, in a lot of ways, it's the most existential text she wrote, because it's literally about her own struggle with something that every human being, but especially every Jew, should struggle with, right? And so when I say it's her most existential work, I mean by that, in terms of people like Heidegger and Jaspers and Ortega and, you know, the usual suspects for existential philosophy, you know, truth is not universal in the same way like that 2 + 2 is universal, right? The existential truth requires you to argue, it requires you to struggle and wrestle to come up with something, right? To see what's there, right? And that may be disagreed with by other people. So that requires a kind of back and forth. You know, and Jaspers himself says communication begins in disagreement. The issue that you see here is these letters she received, the reactions that she got for the presentation of this truth are examples of non-communication. They're not disagreeing, they're just hatefully annihilating the other, right? The person who said what they don't want to believe is the case, right? That Adolf Eichmann is a human being, and on top of that, he's just a freaking bureaucrat, and he is not the embodiment of evil.
Right.
In fact, no Nazi was the embodiment of evil, right? And to me, that's an extremely important thing after the Shoah, because it'd be so easy to say, oh, the Nazis were monsters, they were demons, they were not human, which is actually, it allows everybody else to get away, because then, oh, well, so if they're monsters, they're a special case, so we don't have to worry about doing that kind of stuff. Since then we know it's not true.
What I like about what you said about her writing Eichmann is courageous, especially in light of existentialism. So people likely know that existentialists like to write a lot of literature. So you can read Camus' literature, you can read Sartre's literature. People might have read some of that while they were in school. And that the existentialists use storytelling as a way to show a person grappling with the world and how they made the choices that they made. But that was through fiction. So what Arendt did in Eichmann in Jerusalem, I think this is what I'm gleaning from what you said, what Arendt did in Eichmann in Jerusalem is she saw the testimony, she went through all the court reports and all that stuff. And instead of writing a story about how she was processing Eichmann in Jerusalem, the Adolf Eichmann trial rather, she wrote about it, right? And we have to remember that Eichmann in Jerusalem wasn't a book, it was a series of five stories. So she was presenting her analysis of it in sections. So she was having that existential drama with herself in this courageous way,
Mhm.
in the public, instead of, I don't want to say hiding behind literature, because literature isn't always hiding. You can reveal things in literature that you can't in real life when you talk about yourself sometimes. But in this way, Arendt was also demonstrating her Omar Monday, or her longing for friendship in the world, because she was being honest with everyone about what she thought. And she did brave that, because she knew that not everyone was going to like it, but she felt like she had to do that anyway. So when we're talking about authenticity in the context of the project, that's one of the things we're talking about, is how do we bravely reveal ourselves, our true selves, to others, knowing that we may or may not be agreed upon. And if Jaspers is right, and that friendship really discourse is rooted in disagreement, like, we have to be willing to and open to having that disagreement.
Right. And I think that's actually where we get into what some people call cancel culture, what other people call deplatforming, or any of the rest of that. It's the question of when you're speaking in public, do you really believe what you're saying? And if you really believe what you're saying, are you not open to clarification? Are you not open to disagreement? Are you not open to, so it's another thing. It's like, with a lot of what happens in deplatforming and cancel culture is a lot of the people who reach that point, they've been given lots of opportunities to change what they say, or to adapt what they say, or to go and, try to find a different way to say it so that maybe it would be understood better. But they just sort of like stop and don't want to go any farther, which kind of gets you to the point where it's like, is this really public discourse? Or you just want us to listen?
Rhetoric, yeah.
Yeah, it's just rhetoric. You're just trying to persuade me of something. So that's what I also find about it is interesting about the courage to write this thing, that, and there's no way she didn't know. She knew the people. She knew the people around her, and she knew what the stakes were. So it had to be an act of courage, but it also was probably very trepidatious. So she was probably trepidatious about it.
It caused her much angst. I mean, when you read like biographies, like, it caused her a lot of writing, that caused her a lot of angst.
But it was her friendships that I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but it's her friendships with people like Jaspers and her husband, Heinrich Blücher, and a few other people that were just steadfast. Even, see, this is the difference. Jaspers didn't agree with her completely about the whole Eichmann and Jerusalem thing, but he didn't. He talked to her. They communicate. They lovingly struggled, as Jaspers would say, to try to figure out what it is that they agree and don't agree on, and can there be any kind of like rapprochement or changing in this direction or that direction, right?
Right.
And that's what you need.
Right. And I think that even in her public writing, she was speaking differently with a different purpose than she does in these letters, correspondences that we read. And also, to Joy, what you were talking about in regards to plurality, weren't there instances of her writing people who made choices or joined causes that she didn't agree with? I mean, what are some examples of her showing friendship to people who publicly did things that she didn't agree with, in the way that friends stayed with her while she presented ideas that people didn't agree with?
Well, she was involved in the Zionist movement, right? And she took a particular stance that was not very popular, but she had a variety of relationships and friendships with people who had different opinions on how the state of Israel should move forward, and how the court. So the Eichmann trial is one of the first international tribunal courts. So she had a lot of opinions about whether that trial was the whether that trial should be I'm sorry, it was it was the first court for the state of Israel. It was an international court. That was the issue. We're concerned about whether that trial should be the state of Israel or should be through an international court. At any rate, she was involved for a certain amount of time in highly visible political issues, and she had a variety of opinions, and that she left that behind because she felt like she wasn't suited for politics, but she did maintain relationships with people. And again, her ideas on thinking, which she talks about in like her later book, The Life of Mind, for around thinking requires a conversation between you and yourself, but that ultimately that little conversation that you've had with yourself has to go out into the world. It has to say what it has to say out in the world. And then I like to say it gets feedback, right? So you say, this is what I think, world. And then all these people around you, they give you feedback on what you say. And then you take it back to yourself and you have this other conversation with yourself. So for Arendt, thinking in and of itself required contemplation within yourself, like the vita contemplativa, as she would say, as well as the vita activa, the active life. You had to have that disagreement. You had to have those other people in order to think yourself, not just to form an opinion, but to actually think, right? So the idea of the pluralistic world, people having different opinions from you being active in that, it's a requirement for her. Now, not everyone out in the public world was her friend, she said, but that's what she was striving towards, I think, was a world of comrades. I mean, that has a very socialist tone to it, but I don't mean it in that way, but a world of comrades, of people who came together and thought, and then had the courage to rethink what they thought when they went out into the world to begin with. Do you have the courage to say what you have to say? This has to do with cancel culture, right? Do I have the courage to say what I have to say? And then when I listen to other people and I bring it back to myself, do I have the courage to change my mind? Right? Yeah. That's part of it.
That's been the biggest issue that I've had. I mean, I think there's some people who get canceled, or who get deplatformed, and it's like, well, that person was actually trying to change what they were thinking about. Then there's this whole slew of people that you can see. It's like, okay, so this is the 5th time that you've addressed the fact that people think you should be canceled, and you have not changed your position in any way, shape, or form. You're not even listening to what people are saying. Right. So this is to me in 2022, we live in a society where we have instant communication, instant gratification, instant. And what that really should mean then is everybody is willing to change their mind as quickly as possible, because the flow of information, it does not respect not changing opinions, right? It's like, it's just going like, and I'm not saying that there aren't truths. I'm not saying there aren't, valid models and things that, most people can grab a hold of, but, the world is a big enough place now that we should realize, I mean, really, it's not any bigger than it ever has been, but it's a big enough place now that we should realize that information and knowledge, flow from people, through people, around people, in people, and it requires activity. So it requires thinking, right? Yeah. And I think that the attention culture of social media does not want thinking, and so that's the reason that most of these conversations don't go anywhere.
So one of the things that she was a requirement for sort of dialogue was was there not being a prescribed end, like that it was fine for you to talk amongst friends, but that there's not really a point to it, because she was very anti-teleological. So she was not interested in a conversation whose endpoint was there was already a conclusion. She wasn't interested in saying, how do I get to this endpoint? She was interested in seeing how a conversation unfolds. And like Maggie was saying, that does require the courage to change your mind, because you hear something new. So there's a difference between having a conversation with someone that says, this is the point I have to make, and I'm going to make that point, right? Well, I wouldn't even say that's a conversation, but that's one type of
Right.
speaking relationship you could have with someone, but that's not what she was talking about. She was talking about the ability to flow. Like if I talk to Maggie, Maggie has information to give me that I don't have. Julia has information to give me that I don't have, and I'm willing to change in some way, which is again why I know I keep coming back to our project. That is why we're here. But that is why we're interested in bringing together people who have different backgrounds, who have different practices, who have different points of view, because in order to create something new and really interesting, like you have to bring together people who are different, who may not have worked with another type, dancers. So I have a background in dance, and dancers like to work with other dancers, and artists like, or painters like other anyway, there's a lot of silos in art that I think that performance art tries to shatter some of those silos, but it's good and interesting and better for us to work with, get to know and make friends with people who are working in disciplines that are not ours, not with the idea that we are going to change. We are going to change, but not with the idea that when I get done with this, I'm going to be better or I'm going to have accomplished this, but that through the process of engagement with other people, that they're going to give me information I didn't have, and my perspective on the world is going to change, as it should. And working on a project like that, that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to create this little, friend-making place where what comes out is something entirely different than where we started.
I love that. Also hearing things you were just saying, Maggie. I just have started a letter writing performance, or I've been working on a letter writing performance piece with another artist. And one of the things that really blew my mind in the process is realizing how different it is to communicate where there's all these pauses in between. So I would get his letter and I would think about it for a couple of days, and then I would have the process of writing it down with no interruption and no distraction. And I couldn't read his face to see if if I've gone too far, or if I've crossed some sort of line. And discussing that experience with him was really interesting, and brought up ideas of, like, you have to have grace for your friendship, you have to have trust in order to share that much information. It has been really interesting in thinking about the way we communicate. So if everything's very fast, you don't have 3 days to think about an issue or someone getting upset, and there's no time to process emotion. So I'm looking forward to thinking about this, thinking about her letters in these ways. Like there's a different kind of public speaking that's happening now. It's much more accessible and common for everyone to say things out to large groups of people.
Yeah.
So there's lots more public discourse in that way. And so how can we use the power of friendship to keep ourselves in check and to learn, instead of getting lost in the pain that can happen in those quick responses?
I would say, I don't know what Joy, I'm sure Joy has her own way of approaching this, but I would say the first thing to do in this, I mean, you've already started something really wonderful that I think Arendt and Jaspers would really appreciate. This kind of like deciding on purpose to do something that makes you stop and have to give respect to what's been written to you, instead of, right, because someone took time to write it. It's not something that you read it and then you send back a quick response to. So I think that would be something they would respect a great deal, because it shows that you want to be in loving struggle. But I also think that at least Jaspers, maybe Arendt too, would probably recommend that this is also a good time for people to actually consider who your friends are.
Mm.
Really contemplate who your friends are. One of the things that I do in my coursework where I'm teaching philosophy, and I get a lot of pushback from people at first, is you need to look at your friends and look at them critically, because either you or a combination of you and them or some of them are probably one of the things that's keeping you from figuring out what you really want to do with yourself and being becoming who you are, and all that. So I think that's another aspect of it, right? It's like, first you give respect to the written word, you give respect to the person, but then if you really respect all of these people, you'll have the courage to think about who they are and should they be in my life.
Being a friend isn't always agreeing, right? Being a friend is sometimes saying, yeah, that just doesn't even make any sense.
Yeah, no, yeah, right.
And that's part of thinking. I think that we set the project up to be 6 months long, so it coincides not only with the salon series that the pop-up has. We have our own workshop. We've set this up to be a longer period of time because exactly what Julia is saying is that we're giving people the opportunity to have experiences or conversations, and they don't have to immediately respond. Sometimes I know I've gotten put in situations where it's like, here's this article, here's this piece of art or whatever, tell me what you think. And it's like, okay, and I need it tomorrow. It's like, okay, great. Right. And so we don't have time to process it. And I think especially when we're collaborating with other people, we need to take the time to get to know who they are and let them speak and learn to hear them, right? We have to take time to do all of those things in different scenarios and in different ways. And that's why having a little bit of a longer time frame, I think, will be so wonderful for this project, because if our end goal is to have a participatory, immersive performance, then giving everyone the opportunity to build relationships with the other artists just only allows the people who come to the performance to feel like they're being brought into a world, like a welcoming world that is a world in and of itself, right? I think the time will be is a beautiful part of the project.
I'm excited, and I do want to ask if anyone's watching, if you have any questions. We're very open to answering them. I don't believe there are any questions right now.
Not right now.
This is the time. Please send in your questions if you would like a response from us, although you're welcome to contact me or Joy with any questions about the submission process, or how the project will look, or questions about if you're right for it, or what we're looking for, those kinds of things. We're both very open to having these conversations.
I think that there are, because Julie and I have talked about this a lot. Julie and I have done a lot of projects together, and there are things that, Julia does that are much better than how I could handle something, and vice versa. I am killer when it comes to applications, because for my regular job, I write a lot. So writing is not an obstacle for me in any way. Not that I always write well, but I don't feel intimidated by writing. We do have some questions that are narrative driven, that are maybe questions that artists aren't usually asked to respond to in a submission. And so I want to put out there that we're not looking for philosophical answers to these questions. And I know I put a word cap on there. That doesn't mean you need to use all of the words, right? So if you're feeling intimidated by answering questions that you wouldn't normally answer, just give an authentic answer to it as best you can. Don't overthink it. We're not looking for essays or publishable manuscripts. We're just looking to really find out why you're interested in the project. And part of the process, when we go through the applications, by the jury will go through the applications, then we'll be interviewing people. So you'll have a chance to sort of talk through those responses with us if you feel like writing is not necessarily your best thing. So you'll have the opportunity to talk to the selection panel as well. So write from the heart, more than you write from the head, maybe? Is that, I mean, I hate to say that because I do study philosophy, but write from your heart.
Yeah.
Julia,
Sometimes writing from the heart's better anyways. And I of course I do poetry too. So, but sometimes what happens in the head is too, well, it's what's what I want to say? It's too sterile. It needs to be dirty. And it gets dirty if it comes from the heart or the genitals, I suppose. I don't know. Something like that, right? It's like it needs to like remind itself it's part of the body. There's a way that the mind, I mean, just think about it. The mind, it's like, it's not part of the body, right? We don't say the brain, we say the mind. So, but I think it has to be a fulfillment of, an expression, a physical expression, right? So that's okay. There are philosophers in the history of humanity, or thinkers, as I'd rather call them, people who do really radical thinking, and they say some really beautiful things from the heart. And I don't care that it's not a logical argument. It's sometimes that's what you.
It sometimes hurts. Henry asked a question. It says, by project, do you mean there's an end result performance object installation? Please explain. So Henry, yes, at the end of the 6-month period, so the beginning of November, we will have a final immersive performance participatory event where the 4 artists who are selected will work together to create an experience for people to come and attend. And Good to Pop-Up is committed to events that are free for the public. So this won't be a ticketed event, they're a nonprofit. So this will be something that will be very open. We'll want to have as many and as different types of people come to this as possible. So when Julia and I talk about immersive and performance, I think Julia, we're talking about social sculpture, which some people on this call may not know what that is. So would you maybe want to explain what social sculpture is, Julia?
Sure.
Just throw that your direction.
But the whole process is we're thinking of the entire process of coming up with the work, with the artist as a sculpture of itself, and the evening, the experience is also a sculpture. People and experience are part of the sculpture that we're making. The engagements, we're being very thoughtful in how we create the way that this art is being made and how we invite people in. So people are part of the medium, relationships are part of the medium, discussion, all of that is part of this big sculpture that we're creating together. So there will be
Henry asked another question really quickly, so because this may relate to what you're talking about, Julie. Henry asked if there's a site designated for the end project, if you want to address that while you're talking.
Sure. We decided to wait on choosing a venue because we want to see the kind of work that will be involved. We're very, very open in what kind of work will be a part of this. Like Joy is interested in seeing how people could cook in a way that is aligned with this conceptually.
Could I interrupt you there just for 1 second, Julia? Because I didn't realize that you were thinking about the cooking thing. Something to keep in mind is that the word companion means those with whom I break bread.
I love that.
So, yeah, pan, Spanish bread. So, yeah.
Right. So we don't know if we need a kitchen or not, and we won't know until we choose our format.
Right.
Right.
And Arendt loved to cook for her friends. And so I want, people have kind of made an ideology out of Arendt herself. She was a person who did things with her friends. She didn't just write, manifestos all the time. So I would love for someone to take on trying to write, cook like Arendt. So scale, place. Okay. So Henry asked another question. So scale, place, and duration is dependent on the included participants. That's correct. We do know that it will be one event, so it will not be a series of days. We do know that it will likely be in the evening. So, a typical evening event would be, maybe hour and a half, 2 hours. Most people can't handle much more than that, myself included. So that's what we've got. So I hope that answers your question, Henry. Does anyone else have questions? I don't know if there's anyone. I can see the questions that come through the chat, but I don't know if there are any coming from Facebook. Okay, we have like 1 minute left, so I'm going to tidy us up if I can. I just want to thank my friends, Julia and Maggie, for doing this today. And thanks to Grant and Go to Pop-Up for giving us the opportunity to do this project. This is like a project of a lifetime for me, so I'm really excited about it. I hope that from this interview kind of conversation, you have a better idea of the types of people we're looking to collaborate with and create a friend world with. Like Julia mentioned, if you have any questions about the project or about the process, please let one of us know. You can always reach out to Grant as well. And I don't know, I really look forward to seeing what kind of applications we get. I look forward to seeing, yeah, all the inspired work and the artists to protect. So Grant, do you want to close us out?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Very well said. It was a fantastic discussion that we had this afternoon. And I just want to thank everybody, Maggie, Julia, and Joy, for signing on with us this afternoon. It was great. And I'm looking forward to getting all these sort of submissions in and seeing how this project unfolds. It's going to be a great and fascinating and fun experience.
Fun. Yay.
Fun.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. And
thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
have a great rest of your day.